looking ahead to where the Indian economy is going. Let's go over to Shweta Kohli, who's going to take us through more of this.
Thanks very much, Kajori. Clearly tough times, calling for some tough measures. But is the government getting a bit too desperate now to find a way out of this economic crisis? Joining us for more on that, Kiran, Mazumdar-Shaw, chairperson of Biocon. Thanks so much for sparing time to talk to us. Mrs. Shaw, you've clearly tweeted saying you're not in favour of such a proposal. We know the Prime Minister's office also seems to have rejected it. But are we seeing the government now clearly running out of options and ideas?
Well, you know, Shweta, first and foremost, I've always considered Mr. Veerappa Moily to be a very thoughtful minister, and I'm very surprised that he even came up with such a ridiculous suggestion like a petrol curfew. You know, it has such huge ramifications, and he's not the kind of minister who would make such random, irrational statements. So that is worrying. You know, we all know that if you have such a curfew, it immediately translates into job losses. Apart from that, we know it is not going to serve the objective of reducing consumption of petrol, because we know that all it will create is a confusion and mayhem in terms of a rush for petrol buying in the morning and a rush for petrol buying in the evening, and certainly that's not what is intended. But I think when you increase petrol prices to a certain level, you will automatically people economizing. And that, of course, on one side achieves that objective, but on the other side, it is a very, very inflationary, aspect, which, people are going to be very, very challenged with. So we know that we have a huge, huge challenge in terms of our current account deficit. We know that we will have a huge fiscal impact if we do not increase prices. So what is the way out?
And clearly that remains a question. What are the options before the government right now? Because what we have seen is that the Prime Minister has clearly told the Petroleum Minister that he wants the oil import bill cut by $25 billion. And part of it, of course, would be fuel conservation. We know he's going to come up with an entire fuel conservation drive on the 16th of September. But are we going to see some really desperate measures kicking in? Right now, of course, both the Petroleum Minister backtracking on his statement, the Prime Minister's office rejecting this particular move of a night curfew. But fuel conservation is the way forward in these times of a crisis.
So are you going to talk about rationing of petrol? That's the only thing he can do. And that doesn't augur well in terms of how the government is managing its economy. And we all know that any measures being announced today will only really see some impact in a few years' time. And that's what the problem is. We are suffering from an economic decline because of what we didn't do for many, many years. And also, Shweta, let me tell you, the sad thing about economic decline is that it actually impacts the poor the most.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think this government has failed to do. It has not created jobs. You know, it has miserably failed on employment generation.
At the same time, the worrying fact remains is that now we are seeing more and more brokerages downgrading India's growth estimates to levels of 4%. Now, 4% growth for India this fiscal, we are to believe those growth estimates, is an absolute disaster. Do you believe in those numbers? We've already seen the first quarter growth coming at a dismal 4.4%.
Well, you know, Shweta, there are a lot of things which on one side look very little, but on the other side we can actually do something to at least revive certain aspects of the economy. For instance, if you really want exports to be boosted, then let the Commerce Minister come out with some bold economic reforms that boost exports. We need definitely to make sure that we take advantage of a weak rupee to, improve and increase our exports. On the other hand, we also have heard the Finance Minister talk about having more reforms, more FDI, and how do we do all of this? There are various mechanisms to do that. For instance, why can't the Finance Ministry make a very categorical statement that there will be no retrospective taxation aspects for people to worry about? Why can't we sort of basically become far more an open economy that basically, incentivizes FDI to come into this country? We have been hearing about all these project approvals, gaining momentum. But, On the other hand, there are other issues which have added to the confusion. The land acquisition bill is certainly going to deter this kind of investment. Right. So you're going to see brownfield projects but no greenfield projects. We are just constantly sending confused statements all the time. So I'm really, really concerned.
All right, clearly at a time when we're seeing the need for some tough economic measures, we're also seeing populism kicking in. You're someone who's been a very strong critique of the timing of the food security bill, something that is being discussed again today in Rajya Sabha. On one hand, we're seeing the finance minister trying to make all the right noises when it comes to the economy, saying that we will ensure that we will curtail the deficits, so we will ensure that we bring the economy back on track. But is it really instilling the kind of confidence it should in India Inc.? Do you believe that we have time to now revive the sentiment in this tenure of the UPA?
Well, you know, Shweta, I'm not an economist, but I think you don't have to be an economist to know that a lot of what the government is doing today is going to impact our economic growth. So, you know, we've become a welfare state. We have neither created real jobs. We have neither really addressed food security in a sustainable way. We have neither addressed health security in a sustainable way. So, you know, I think what is really required today is to have a sustainable model and an implementation model that really works for our economy. Nobody is looking at that. We are just mindlessly making statements and policy statements that don't look at the holistic impact of economic growth and development. That is my real concern, that this is all about populism and populist policies where people are not looking at the long-term ramification and impact of what we are doing.
All right, in fact, talking...
Basically, our voices are not being heard because we don't count today.
Talking about populism and populist policies, the food security bill, which is being debated in Rajya Sabha. Let's cut across to Rajya Sabha. Kiran, with us, we'll talk a little more about that and its impact on the deficit. But let's right now go across to Rajya Sabha and listen into what's happening there. All right, the food security bill there being debated in Rajya Sabha. Let's go back to Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw to get a sense of whether we're going to find a way out of this economic crisis or not. Is the India story really over, Kiran? We've seen the rupee depreciating to shocking levels. We are really hoping that the policymakers have some sort of a magic wand, which they keep saying they don't. But do you see any for the economy reviving?
You know, I for one, Shweta, don't think at all that the India story is over. But the way our politicians are going about the economic challenges ahead of us, it really makes me very concerned that we are not seeing voices of sanity and reason really debating the economic development agenda for India. That is my major concern. Even just now when you made me listen to what is happening in Parliament, it is, you know, cacophony. I mean, it is sort of irrational, mindless cacophony that I hear. Where are these, you know, voices of reason and sanity and who are going to debate this whole issue properly so that we come up with policies that are, you know, going to boost this economy? I have no doubt about it that we can revive the economy if we really just come up with pragmatic policies. But, you know, today, I think people are at crossroads, at cross purposes, in conflict. That is what is killing this economy.
All right, Mr. Shaw, many thanks for joining us and sharing your views. This at a time when the government is looking at all sort of options to revive the economy and trim the deficit. Let's go back to Rajya Sabha.